Hey, Jason, I'll tell you what, man. You always come around at the right time when it comes to these books, because this book, it starts with one. It's ripe. It's perfectly ripe for this moment of now with the new band put together, the new album put together. I mean, you're on.
Yeah, it's been wild, man.
Wild in what way? Because see, we can only go so far with our ticket. You've been behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's funny because I started writing this book, 2 years ago and had this publication date of October 1st, 2024 set in 2022. I had obviously no idea that they were coming back. I just wanted to, I thought that there was a period at the end of this sentence of Linkin Park. And, I wrote the book that way. Obviously, I updated a couple things along the way because they had a single come out last year that hit the top 40 of the Hot 100. And that kind of became the ending of the book. But this book was getting prepped, and then I got the heads up in mid-August when I was writing this Billboard cover story about their comeback that they were reforming and they had a new album. I was like, holy cow, like how this is wild. It was a pure coincidence. And I couldn't, it was very lucky on my part for sure. And
you're going to reach so many different generations because the original, the OG when it comes to Linkin Park is out there dying for a book like this. And then you've got the Generation X and Alpha coming out here going, no, it's my music because look, they've got a brand new album out. So look at the people that you're going to affect with this book.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And, I totally agree that part of the reason why I wrote this book was I just couldn't believe that there wasn't a career spanning book about Linkin Park yet, just because they were so enormous. They meant so much to so many different people, and their story was so rich. I mean, there were so many things to unpack about the story of Linkin Park. And so when I started writing, there were so many different things to get into, so many different huge hits and albums and detours and heartbreaking moments. And then the book's done, and now you're absolutely right that they are back for a new generation. And the Emptiness Machine, which is the lead single from their new album, has been their biggest hit in like 15 years. It's pretty surreal to see them come back. It's also not surprising to me that their music is still resonating, and part of the reason why I wrote the book as well is just because I knew that you looked at the numbers, the monthly Spotify listeners, the Facebook fans. There's just millions and millions and millions of people who were still listening to Linkin Park before this comeback.
Yeah. Let's talk about that Emptiness Machine. I mean, they make a powerful statement in that video, man. It's everyday people who are turned into machines.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And I think they're always trying to push themselves visually and sonically. And, it's interesting because there are songs on this new album that resonated with me a little bit more. I love the second song they put out, Heavy as the Crown, which they put out last week. The Emptiness Machine, the more I listen to it, the more I watch the video, it's like, man, this is just like classic Linkin Park. This is just meat and potatoes, awesome rock songwriting. And, it's done so well so far. I think it's going to continue to. It's endlessly replayable to me.
Well, see, I want to know how the new lineup is going to inspire the next generation of music. And the reason why I bring that up is because I've always credited Linkin Park for bridging the gap between rock and hip hop, which then inspired country music to bring in a hip hop beat. And I believe that Linkin Park was one of the master leaders of doing that.
Yeah, I think that their fusion of sounds is really baked into their DNA. And I think that, obviously they came up around the nu metal boom of the turn of the century, but I think that they were just a lot smarter than a lot of those other bands just because they had their influences kind of down pat with rock and hip hop. Like Mike Shinoda was just an enormous hip hop nerd. He still is. Johan, a huge electronic head. Chester had that grunge sound that he had toured with before Linkin Park. So they knew exactly how to mash up genres. And yeah, I totally agree. I think they're still doing that with their new lineup. Emily Armstrong, who was in Dead Sara, is obviously a huge vocal presence, but also a great songwriter and a great presence in the studio. And then you have Colin, who's their new drummer and multi-instrumentalist and co-producer. He is all over the map in terms of sound. So it's been really cool to kind of see them reform and reignite this kind of fusion that we're talking about.
Yeah, you're right about Emily. She's got that powerful voice, and this is like an NFL player where you put on the right team, you're going to get yourself a championship ring. And I think Emily right now is going to get a lot of attention with that voice.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is like her band Dead Sara has 3 albums out, so people could hear her voice. She's not an unknown, and I think that when I was talking to the guys for this cover story for Billboard, that was a real emphasis for them, was that she's not a rookie. Like, she has
Right.
been on big stages, she has put out albums, she has done tours for multiple months. Like, she is in it, and I think that really appealed to them instead of having some newbie come on and join them at these arena shows that they're now playing.
You got to talk to me about that book cover because I want it on a poster. I need it in a frame. Is it? Are you going to market it like that?
Oh, cool, right? Yeah, I love that cover. You know, we had a couple different options for the cover of the book, and that one, I think it's from the A Thousand Suns era around 2010, which is one of my favorite eras of Linkin Park. And I just kind of loved the stacking and basically the facial expressions. They just seem so focused on that cover. And yeah, and you know, it's funny because It Starts With One was not the original title of the book.
Wow.
And I think maybe midway through writing, kicking around different titles, we're like, what should it be? And I just thought of It Starts With One, and I heard it in my head of like, it starts with, and then it just kind of was off the races. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I picked up on the title is that it starts with one. One day there was an idea when they were young, did put this book together in the way that you didn't start at the success, but you begin at the actual starting of the band.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you picked up on that because, yeah, I think a lot of life just in general is just kind of happenstance and this kind of serendipity of being in the right place at the right time. Part of what I write about is like, look, there are a lot of talented bands. There are a lot of talented artists that just never make it. And
Right.
and part of it is luck and fortune. And, you know, you have the first chapter of It Starts With One is talking about the pre-Linkin Park band Zero, which just played a pretty bad show at Whiskey A Go Go. But the right executive who sniffed out their potential, and it kind of goes from there. Then he happened to know someone who was in touch with Chester Bennington, who was a state away in Arizona and needed a new band a couple years later. So, you know, I think that it does that was also the idea of It Starts With One. It starts with, you know, just one kind of night or moment that can reignite or ignite an entire movement that we've seen from this band.
Yeah. You know, you bring up the band Zero, and the name of the album is From Zero. I mean, is there a connection there?
Yeah, I think that they definitely wanted that wink to happen, to basically say like, look, this is basically a rebirth to some degree, but also that they've been at this point where they have been put together a new lineup and kind of start from scratch. You know, I think that obviously they kept building upon Hybrid Theory. Said, yeah, they're back to basics. And I think that From Zero is kind of a nod to saying like, hey, we have been at this point and we can do this again.
Being a mobile entertainer all these years, Linkin Park was one of those bands that you had to play. But the thing about it is, though, is that when you're doing high school dances, you know, if you didn't play the right Linkin Park song, then the floor would split. And they were a very tough band to play only because they go in so many different directions.
Yeah, it's really true. You know, it's funny because there are some like dancier Linkin Park songs, you know, Faint and Breaking the Habit and the Pump Up thing. But yeah, definitely not like more like dance floor material for sure.
So how does the band honor Chester out there on the road? Because we are going through that age of music where we're losing members of bands, and they keep going, but they honor them in their own special way.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I saw their show at Barclays Center in Brooklyn. It's been interesting. They're doing kind of this warm up run of a dozen shows or somewhere around there, and then they're going to tour heavily next year. It's going to be interesting. There is in 2025 more of an acknowledgement of Chester during the show. You know, you see a lot of this when, you know, Queen with Adam Lambert tours. They have, you know, a kind of a part of the show where they kind of salute Freddie Mercury and stuff like that. There doesn't exist that kind of salute to Chester within the show yet. I would guess that they're here. I think these shows, to me, just watching them play 27 songs in the span of 2 hours, they just want to go. It's like they've been a wind-up toy that's been wound up for 7 years, and they just want to play absolutely every song that they can. You see a lot of joy. You see a lot of almost like an exhalation of the audience replaces Chester by singing his songs back to the band when they're playing. I think that Emily is a new member of the band and a new co-vocalist and a new future. But it'll be interesting to see if they formalize something on the road where they do a little bit more of a Chester salute. I don't think it's necessary right now because everybody kind of understands it where they're at.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I'm the drum freak. I'm the guy that had to sit there and watch the videos with Colin on that drum set because I just want to make sure it's the right drummer.
Oh,
it's
cool.
you got to look like it because we always talk about the front man of a band, but that guy in that back seat back there. A lot of people watch that person too.
Yeah, Colin's amazing, man. And I was really, really impressed watching him at the show that I caught. And yeah, look, I mean, Rob was a huge part of Linkin Park. I think that his not joining this new era is a little sad, but also very understandable. Like, I think that they have been touring for 20 years. They were basically nonstop for 2 decades. And the fact that he didn't want to continue is that's the point he's at in his life. I totally get that. But yeah, I think they found a real gem with Colin, who is not just a drummer and an awesome drummer, but a multi-instrumentalist. He's a great bassist and also a co-producer. I believe From Zero is credited as a co-production between him and Mike. So yeah, they found a real star with him behind the kit.
I've always wondered what the psychology one goes through in the way of when they don't go out on the road. Like, for instance, I'll bring up Mick Mars from Motley Crue. It's like, wow, Mick, like you were that guy, and he's to the side. And a lot of these bands are going through this right now. But I want to know what the psychology behind it is.
It's interesting because I think part of it, and you think about someone like Brad Delson, their guitarist, who's awesome, who made this album with Linkin Park, but is not touring behind it. And again, like, I think that's also really understandable to me. He's at a point in his life where he wants to create and be in the studio, but he also doesn't want to tour for months on end. Like, I totally get that. Touring's a grind. They did it for 20 years, and I totally respect his decision, especially, a lot of artists don't have that luxury of saying, like, I'm going to put out an album, but I'm not going to tour behind it. They have to tour just for monetary purposes. They're not in that situation. So I totally understand him saying, like, hey, I want to be part of this creative process, but I'm going to stay home.
Yeah, I totally get that. I'm blessed with the opportunity to talk with a lot of bands around the country, and that touring thing is big in their heart. But boy, the thing about it is that bands are now in control of the business side of the touring, and they think that we're headed into this regional area of music again. You being so close to music, do you see that as well? We can't go on a national tour, but we can do a regional tour.
Yeah, I think it's a question that everybody is trying to figure out, right? Like, just in terms of what is the most impactful way we can perform these songs and play these shows. Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of different kind of quote unquote residencies lately, in terms of, not only Las Vegas residencies and big pop stars making that more of a thing, but also, someone like Harry Styles just setting up shop at Madison Square Garden and saying, like, hey, instead of touring, I'm going to play 15 shows at Madison Square Garden and make people come to me. I think that it's also a sustainability issue, and that's a band like Coldplay has kind of led the forefront of figuring out how to route their tour in a way that makes the most sense ecologically. Yeah, I think that in terms of regional performances, I think that plays into it, of saying, like, hey, let's super serve smaller or more local fan bases. I think it really is kind of a question that is that the entire touring industry is still figuring out, especially now that we're in this area of, post-COVID, 2022, 2023, everybody was on tour because there was just so much pent-up demand for live music again. Now, 2024, 2025, we're kind of dipping back to the mean a little bit and figuring out, hey, how do we most effectively reach fans?
Wow. One of the things that you put inside the book, which I thought was very inspiring, was the way that once Linkin Park started to click, it was no longer about being local. And I love that kind of attitude, because it means we can get out there and we can make it.
Yeah, I mean, they toured behind that first album for so long. And it was interesting because they just, I think part of it was they spent so many years, reshifting their lineup and trying to find a label, and then working on songs that didn't make it, and then working on more songs and label showcases and stuff like that. That once they had their album, they were just ready to go. And then really what happened was they put out Hybrid Theory in October 2000, and they just kept going with that album cycle for basically a year and a half. And they just kept scoring hit after hit. In the end, became one of the biggest songs of 2001. And yeah, they just kept going and going and going. And part of that, to your point, was international. They played a ton of overseas gigs, a lot of Europe. Yep. And then over the course of the rest of their career, a lot of Asia, like they're huge in Asia, and South America as well. They actually just had to add a second Brazil date because there was too much demand for their first Brazil show, which is pretty. I mean, it just speaks to their international appeal and really the universality of their music for sure.
Now, you being as close as you are with music, what performers or bands are not getting the biography they deserve?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm gonna punt a little bit because I have some ideas for the next book, but I will say that I think a lot of pop artists over the course of the 2000s and 2010s don't get their due in terms of how culturally impactful that they've become. I think we're a little bit more cognizant of it now in the age of Taylor Swift, where critics are much more understanding of like, hey, what is the value of a new Taylor Swift album, of a new Beyonce album, of a new Bad Bunny album? Back in the 2000s and 2010s, I think there was much less of that, where it was just like, oh, this is kind of pop drivel for teens. But a lot of that music, it still resonates today. I mean, you think like critics kind of dismissed Britney Spears. Guess who still has a lot of people listening to her? Britney Spears. I think that Lady Gaga also transcended that to some degree. So in terms of your question about a biography, I think that there's a lot of critical mining to do in terms of the pop music that was so big over the past 25 years, but kind of critically dismissed. And I think they deserve analysis just as much as anything.
Well, the one thing that I hope that does not happen to Linkin Park is what's happened to groups like Van Halen, where everybody's separated. Oh, I like this version better, because I think both versions of this band are absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I think Linkin Park, when they came back with Emily and Colin, I think they always understood that there were going to be some people who weren't on board. And I think that they respect that. I think that they would say, hey, look, if you're not into this, if Linkin Park in your mind is just Chester and the original lineup, like, we get it, but we're moving forward and we're doing our thing. And I think I think to your point, I think a lot of people, from what I've seen in terms of fan messages and Reddit and Discords and all the kind of fan forums, people are on board. People are really excited about this new album and everything along with it. And just honestly, like seeing the show a couple of weeks ago, I mean, hearing these songs live again, I mean, I never thought I was going to see. I wrote this book, and my wife and I have listened to a ton of Linkin Park over the past couple of years. I never thought I was going to see a Linkin Park show with her. I never thought I was going to get to see In the End or Numb live with my wife, and we just did a couple weeks ago, and that's really, really special to me.
What an amazing book. I can't thank you enough for sharing it with us. And I guarantee that you'll be back in 10 years with an update on what's going on with Linkin Park.
Listen, man, anytime you'll have me, I'm happy to stop by.
Be brilliant today, dude.
Thank you, man. Thank you. You too.